67 AD, 3961 AM. Josephus leads a Jewish army against Roman forces and is defeated by Vespasian at Jotapata. He is taken prisoner, his virtues as a writer and historian discovered, and commissioned to write a history of the Jewish people. Josephus, known now as Flavius Josephus, wrote Antiquities of the Jews, The Jewish War, and Against Apion. All three of these major historical works preserved today, though in regarding certain Christian statements, there is evidence that later Christian translators interpolated small passages into his work. This is the traditional date for when the Apostle Peter with his wife Concordia and many others were crucified in Nero's gardens, Peter crucified upside down. It is said that Paul was beheaded at this time at the Aquae Salvae in Rome. 1. Secret Places of the Lion. 68 AD. In the 17th year of the passing of the Romanid Apocalypse Comet Group, an unusual occurrence of geological displacement occurred as recorded by Pliny. An entire Roman estate was completely turned around. It was as if the estate was sitting on a giant underground cone that turned around twisting, setting the estate backward. For many reasons, including murdering his wife, his mother Seneca, and multitudes of other crimes, the Senate declares Nero enemy of the public and condemned him to a slave's death, which meant he was to be whipped before the people until dead. Galba is elected emperor and Nero flees Rome, committing suicide with the aid of a former slave named Epaphroditus. Tacitus wrote that Rome was in uproar with auctions. Quote, "Yet great was the joy to think that men whom Nero had enriched would be as poor as those whom he had robbed." Unquote. With Nero's death, a civil war erupted between the provinces and legions loyal to Galba, Otho, and Vitellius throughout Gaul, the German territories, and Italy. The civil war would not end until 70 AD. This was the 576th year of the Republic of Rome, founded in 509 BC. 576 being 144 times 4, and a major golden proportion number. This was also 408 years to the fall of Rome in 476 AD, or 4896 months, 2448 plus 2448. 1. Pliny, Natural History, Universe and the World. 2. Tacitus, Annals. 3. Tacitus, The Histories. 69 AD, 3963 AM. Roman General Vespasian offered sacrifices at the altar on Mount Carmel, which was said by Tacitus to be quite ancient. This was in Lower Syria, a famous site in the Old Testament narratives. The local priest prophesied that Vespasian was destined for greatness, and astrologers confirmed this by noting strange omens appearing in the heavens. This was the 18th year of the Romanid group. In this same year, Vespasian became emperor of Rome, and appoints his son Titus to lead the Roman legions against Jerusalem to put down the Jewish war. 1. Tacitus, The Histories, Book II. 70 AD, 3964 AM. According to Josephus in the Jewish War, quote, "There appeared a star resembling a sword, which stood over the city, Jerusalem, and a comet that continued a whole year." Unquote. While the entire Mediterranean world was under Roman dominion, across much of Europe, Asia, and Africa, only Jerusalem revolted, a tiny nation hinged between three continents. The hostility of the Jews alarmed the Romans, and the political ramifications of this war were far-reaching, for a victory by such an insignificant nation would quickly initiate revolts in other areas. Vespasian with his 3 legions had invaded Judea and besieged Jerusalem. But now in 70 AD, Titus appeared with his 10th legion and broke through the city's walls. Tacitus wrote that Jerusalem was a famous city of antiquity, whose people originated in Egypt long ago but had left due to a plague. Tacitus also recorded that it was a widespread belief of antiquarians that the Israelites were mentioned in Homer's epic Iliad as the Solmi, their city of Jerusalem called Hierosolimi, Jerusalem. On the day of Pentecost, just before the fall of Jerusalem, as the priests in the temple precinct were seeing to their duties, a trembling occurred and shook the temple with a great noise, and the people in and around the temple were terrified at hearing a mighty multitude of voices in the air that said, quote, "Let us remove hence," unquote. As the battle raged for the walls of Jerusalem, many people witnessed what appeared to be armies fighting in the sky over the city with fiery weapons as the temple was illuminated with a strange light, according to Josephus. Interestingly, Tacitus supports Josephus' own account in writing that the temple doors were thrust open and a mighty voice declared a departure. Some reported the air around them mysteriously stirred. The fall of Jerusalem and the emergence of Vespasian and Titus, according to Tacitus, were found in the prophetic books of the temple. Josephus reports that 1,000,000 Jews died defending against Rome in the Jewish War, or were executed afterwards, and that 97,000 Jews were captured and sold into slavery. The fields were salted just as the Romans had done to Carthage in 146 BC. The Christians of Jerusalem and surrounding land were the only ones to escape the Romans, for they heeded the warnings of Jesus uttered in Matthew 24 concerning the destruction of the temple after Jerusalem was encompassed with armies. Jesus had instructed the people to flee to the hills, and the Christian population did in fact flee to Pella, a city east of Jordan, and Petra. Jesus had said, quote, "For the days shall come upon thee, that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee round, and keep thee in on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation." Unquote. The last words here reveal that this destruction was a judgment specifically due to the Jewish denial of Jesus. E. G. White said it best when she wrote that the great sin of the Jews was their rejection of Christ, and the great sin of the Christians was their rejection of the law, books of Moses. All men who fought defending Jerusalem were executed, crucified, and those surviving this were sent in chains to arena garrisons throughout the Roman Empire to die violently in colosseums by the jaws and claws of vicious animals, or in gladiatorial combat matched, where they died at the hands of armoured gladiators, for the enjoyment of the crowds. Jerusalem was torn down with the temple and its districts burnt. Roman architects laid waste the city and rebuilt it, as a Roman city named Aelia Capitolina. Rome began minting special coins with the caption "Judea conquered." These coins have been discovered, showing a sorrowful figure representing Judea. Titus had the temple emptied, taking the valuable temple relics and artifacts recast since 537 BC. Among the treasures of the temple acquired by Titus was a copy of the ancient Book of the Upright, known today as the Book of Jasher. This amazing chronological history of the world is available today by Book Tree Press in San Diego. The true Book of Jasher, not to be confused with its forgeries which gave it a bad name among academics. The temple relics are taken to Rome, where the Romans built a huge architectural complex in commemoration of the fall of Jerusalem, with reliefs of the siege and of the artifacts taken from Jerusalem. This is located upon the Arch of Titus. Oswald Spengler, in his Decline of the West, quote, "The destruction of Jerusalem hits only a very small part of the nation, one, moreover, that was spiritually and politically by far the least important. It is not true that the Jewish people have lived in the dispersion since that day, for it had lived for centuries, in a form which was independent of country." Unquote. This was indeed true, for there were very populated Jewish centres at Alexandria and in Persia. They were ruled not by kings or high priests, but by ethnarchs and exilarchs. The calendrics for this year are telling. In the year 713 BC, Jerusalem was surrounded by the Assyrian army of Sennacherib and miraculously delivered, this being 3182 Annus Mundi. Now Roman armies surround Jerusalem in 70 AD, which is 3182 of the Mayan calendar. Further, in 723 BC, the Assyrians again besieged Israel, this being Samaria, the capital, and this siege was exactly 792 years before the Romans defeated Jerusalem. This year was also 1480 years after the Israelites conquered Lower Syria in 1411 BC, occupying the lands formerly belonging to Og of Bashan and Sihon of the Amorites. But the greatest calendrical timeline attached to the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD is that it was precisely 1,000 years after the civil war between Judah and Israel that resulted in the two kingdoms in 931 BC. This is the 1000th year alluded to in the prophecy of Hosea, c. 931 BC. This ended the first day, which began with the nation being torn. This begins another 1000 years to the emergence of the descendants of Israel as the European nations we know today, every single one of them by 1070 AD being Christian cultures. The unification of Judah and Israel will not occur until the final 1000 years is complete, in 2070 AD, known as the Resurrection Event. The fall of Judah begins 65 years to the final destruction of Jerusalem and the Temple, which will be rebuilt in the year 135 AD. This is the second fulfillment of a prophecy uttered by Isaiah, made in 810 BC. Isaiah predicted to the king of Judah that Ephraim, Israel, will be broken in 65 years, indicating the year 745 BC, when the Assyrians carried them away into captivity. Now, this same 65 years is repeated for Judah. 70 AD is 65 years before the fateful date of 135 AD. Interestingly, the news of the burning of Rome reached the Druids in this year, the Druids proclaiming that this was a sign from heaven indicating the coming fall of Rome and, quote, portended universal empire for the Transalpine nations, unquote. The Transalpine nations were all descended from the deported Israelites. 1. Josephus, The Jewish War. 2. Tacitus, The Histories. 5. Luke. 6. Planet in Rebellion. 7. The Jesus Papers. 9. Decline of the West. 10. Hosea.